No, but you see, it was a small group of moms and a theater director who would be the eventual downfall of one of the most powerful political figures in American history that you've never heard of. And I was reminded of this taking a Strong Towns course, which resurfaced a quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of concerned, thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So if you've been in a funk about the political state of things recently, sit back, listen to this story, and be encouraged. Roll the tape. Just kidding, there's no tape, it's only me. So the powerful political figure you likely never heard of was Robert Moses, a New York City Parks and Rec director and public servant for over 40 years. Political servant? Can he be that influential? Robert Moses is responsible for the displacement of upwards of 500,000 people directly, and policies across the United States that likely displaced millions more. If your city has a highway or interstate that cuts through the middle of it, that's because of Robert Moses. And you might think, design influence and political power are two different things. But it's precisely because he wasn't an elected official that he was able to do some of the things that he did. In fact, mayors, governors, and someone who would go on to be the most powerful president in United States history would regularly go toe-to-toe with him and lose. And Moses didn't just win his battles, he vanquished his enemies. He was vindictive and went out of his way to ruin their careers and reputation. He even managed to not only finagle his brother out of his parents' inheritance, but intentionally make sure that he was unemployable for the rest of his life and died sickly and alone. He would even create more expensive, nonsensical routes for his highways to make sure that a certain neighborhood that he wanted leveled was leveled. That's why a small group of people that would be the beginning of his political undoing was such a surprise. In 1959, a mother noticed plans laid out by surveyors on the ground of the Central Park when they were out to lunch. Plans showed that a section of Central Park was going to be destroyed in order to make way for a parking lot. Moses up until then had control of the narrative, as few politicians or newspapers were willing to speak ill of him. But photographs of a resolute group of moms standing there emotional as trees were torn down would be enough to give the newspapers an angle to show that Robert Moses was in fact not infallible. Underestimating public backlash, Robert Moses did not back down. Yet in the end, he would not only not build his parking lot, instead would build a playground for the mothers. This was known as the first battle for Central Park, a public loss for Robert Moses that was unheard of. This would be the foundation for Joseph Papp, a theater director who started Shakespeare in the Park, an incredibly popular event in which one of Robert Moses' men sought to destroy. Robert Moses, being loyal to those who were loyal to him, backed his men's decision, again underestimating the power of the public when a small group of underestimated people would stand up and have the media on their side. And again, what is later known as the Second Battle of Central Park delivered a public blow to Robert Moses which was up until then unheard of. It began to widen the cracks of the facade of Robert Moses that were created in the First Battle of Central Park. And a backfill of stories from victims of Robert Moses began to fill those cracks and widen them even more. And it is because of this that Robert Moses will go down in history as a villain rather than the hero he was celebrated for. Most of the problems in America we have with infrastructure, traffic, and housing can be tied back to Robert Moses' influence on American policies. And this gave a platform to people like Jane Jacobs and Robert Caro, whose writings would go on to expose him even more, and would show that a small group of concerned citizens are not only effective in standing up against people like Robert Moses, they may in fact be the only people that can. So whatever your city is doing that is daunting, feels too established, or unquestionably powerful, know that that is their greatest weakness. And if your group feels small, fledgling, underestimated, and overlooked, know that that is your greatest strength. Because as the testimonies of his previous victims and horrific stories came to light, it began to turn the tide and allow us as a society to learn from his bad example. History is on the side of the least of these, and infamy belongs to those who concentrate power for their own political gain.